right. So you've sent over like a ton of GDPR stuff, guides, documentation, the whole works.
Yeah.
Looks like you really want to get a grasp on this whole regulation, huh?
Definitely want to make sure we're doing things right.
Don't worry. That's exactly what this deep dive is for. We're going right to the core of GDPR.
Excellent.
We'll unpack those principles, the rights it gives you, and even throw in some real-world examples.
Yeah, those always help.
So it all clicks, you know?
Makes sense. Looking forward to it.
Now, what I find fascinating about GDPR is it tries to, like, walk this line, right?
Yeah.
Between letting organizations use data, which they need to, and, you know, protecting your basic rights as a person.
It's a tough balance.
It's tricky, but we'll break it all down.
All right.
Okay, so before we get lost in the details, let's tackle something that's trickier than you might think.
Okay.
What exactly is personal data under GDPR? It's not always so clear-cut.
Oh, absolutely. It goes way beyond just your name and address. GDPR is pretty broad. Right. It includes anything that can identify you, directly or indirectly.
Oh.
And think about it, even data that seems anonymous
Right.
could still be personal data if it can be linked back to you somehow.
So, like, okay, let me see if I get this. If a company has data about someone who loves, like, collecting vintage teacups,
Okay.
and they live in, let's say, specific zip code, and I happen to be the only vintage teacup enthusiast in that zip code, that could be personal data about me, even though, like, my name's not on it.
You got it. That's exactly right. And what's really interesting is GDPR considers the context, too.
Oh, context.
Like, imagine there's inaccurate information out there about you. Some financial record that's just wrong.
Yeah.
Even if it's not true, it's still personal data because it's related to you and could have a real impact on you.
Wow. Okay. I never thought about it that way. So it's not just about things being accurate.
Right.
It's about any information that's connected to you, right?
Exactly.
Being handled the right way, whether it's, you know, right or wrong.
Yeah.
So data doesn't even have to be explicitly about you to be considered your personal data under GDPR.
Yeah.
It just has to relate to you in some way.
You nailed it. The GDPR cares about how data can affect a person.
Okay.
Even if it doesn't, like, shut your name or tell your whole life story.
Interesting.
It's about those connections.
The connections.
Now, with that in mind,
Yeah.
let's shift gears a bit and talk about the core principles behind GDPR.
Okay.
This is like the foundation of the whole thing.
The foundation. Okay, these principles sound pretty crucial. I'm guessing they're more than just, you know, legal terms.
Well, definitely.
They actually change how companies handle our data in real life.
Absolutely. They set a baseline for responsible data handling, building trust between people and organizations.
I like it.
Take, for example, the principle of data minimization.
Data minimization.
Basically, organizations should only collect the data they absolutely need for a specific reason.
Okay.
That's it.
I can see why that's important for, like, me personally. The less data they have, the less they know about my life.
Right.
Kind of like minimizing my digital footprint, you know?
Yeah.
Keeping more control over my information. But is that, like, the main reason for this whole data minimization thing?
That's a great point, and it's definitely part of it. But think about it from a security angle, too.
Security.
The less a company collects,
Yeah.
the less there is to be compromised if there's a breach.
Oh, right.
Data minimization means less risk in those data leak situations.
So it's not just about keeping things private,
Right.
but also minimizing the potential harm if something goes wrong.
Exactly. You got it.
Makes sense.
So we've got data minimization.
Okay.
Another big one is accuracy.
Accuracy.
We touched on this a bit earlier, but it's worth repeating.
Okay.
Inaccurate data can have a ripple effect, especially if it's someone's opinion presented as fact.
Oh, I see. Like, if a company has the wrong information about me, that could really mess things up, especially with important stuff like my financial records or work history.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Imagine a credit report with errors. It could affect your ability to get a loan, rent an apartment, even get a job.
Yeah, that'd be bad.
The GDPR pushes for accuracy to, protect you from those kinds of harms.
So data minimization, accuracy. Got it. This is all about companies, like being good actors and treating our data right.
Yeah.
But what about me? What can I do to protect my data under GDPR? This is where I really get interested.
That's a great question. And that's where your individual rights under GDPR come in. It's like GDPR gives you this toolbox, right?
A toolbox.
Full of ways to take control of your information.
Okay, I like that.
We'll dive into those tools next. So let's open up that GDPR toolbox and see what's inside.
Let's do it.
One of the most important tools is the right to be informed.
Right to be informed.
It's all about transparency. Organizations can't just hide behind complicated legal jargon anymore.
Right.
You have the right to clear, simple information about what's happening with your data.
So no more slogging through pages of dense legalese and those terms and conditions.
Exactly.
Thank goodness. I always feel like I need a law degree just to sign up for a website. I like this transparency thing.
It's about making informed choices.
What kind of information are we talking about here?
Think of it as like a user-friendly manual for your data. You have the right to know things like what data is being collected, how it's being used, who they're sharing it with, how long they're keeping it, all that stuff.
Makes sense. If I'm handing over my data, I want to know what's going on with it. No more secrets.
Exactly.
But knowing what's supposed to happen is one thing. What if I want to actually see the data a company has about me?
That's where the right of access comes in.
Right of access.
Ever wondered what a company actually has on you?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
This right lets you look behind the curtain. Request access to your data. See what they're storing.
So it's like getting a copy of my own personal file.
Pretty much.
That's cool. What if I see something that's wrong? Can I do anything about it?
You absolutely can. That's the right to rectification.
Rectification.
If you find errors, you can get them fixed.
Okay.
Maybe your address is outdated or your name is misspelled. You can demand accuracy and they have to fix it.
Like having an editor for your personal data.
Exactly.
All right, this is great. I'm starting to feel like I have some control here. But what if I want to go beyond just fixing errors? What if I want my data to just disappear completely, like hitting the delete button on my online presence?
That brings us to the right to erasure, often called the right to be forgotten.
Right to be forgotten.
Now, this is a powerful tool, but it's important to remember it's not a universal delete button.
Right.
It applies in specific situations.
Okay, so there are limits.
Yeah, like when the data is no longer needed for the original reason it was collected, or if you withdraw your consent.
Okay.
Or if the processing was unlawful in the first place.
So it's more like deleting specific files, not wiping my entire hard drive. What are some cases where the right to be forgotten wouldn't work?
Okay, let's say you posted something embarrassing on social media years ago, and now you regret it. You might want it gone.
Yeah.
But the platform could argue it's part of their public archive and refuse to delete it.
Right.
Or if there's a legal obligation to keep the data, like financial records for taxes.
Okay, that makes sense.
The right to erasure wouldn't apply there.
So it's powerful, but not absolute. There are checks and balances.
Exactly.
What if I don't want my data totally erased, but I want to limit how it's used while I figure things out?
Then you've got the right to restrict processing.
Okay.
It's like putting a temporary hold on your data. Say you're disputing the accuracy of some information, or you're not sure about how it's being processed. You can ask the company to restrict processing while the issue is being looked at.
So like hitting the pause button on how my data is used.
Exactly. Gives you some breathing room while things are being sorted out.
I like having options. What other tools are we talking about here?
One of the most innovative rights is the right to data portability.
Data portability.
Allows you to move your data from one service provider to another seamlessly.
Ooh, interesting.
Imagine you've been using a certain social media platform for years and decide to switch to a competitor.
Yeah.
With this right, you can take your data with posts, photos, connections without starting from scratch.
That's amazing. I love that. Makes choosing services that actually fit my needs so much easier. Does this apply to all services, though?
It's not universal. It mainly applies to data you've provided yourself. And it has to be technically possible for the companies to make the transfer happen. But it's a powerful tool to encourage competition and innovation in the digital world. The more control you have, the more freedom you have to choose the services that work best for you.
I'm seeing why this is such a big deal. It really shifts the power dynamic. We're not stuck with whatever a company decides to do with our data anymore. We have choices. Anything else in this toolbox?
We can't forget the right to object.
Right to object, right?
This is about giving you a voice. You can object to the processing of your data based on legitimate interests or for direct marketing purposes.
So it's like setting boundaries.
Exactly. You're not just passively receiving data processing anymore. You have the right to say no.
So we've got transparency, access, correction, deletion, restriction, portability, and the right to object. That's a pretty impressive arsenal.
It is.
But all this puts a lot of responsibility on companies to handle data the right way, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and that's where the principle of accountability comes into play. It's woven throughout GDPR. Organizations can't just talk the talk. They have to walk the walk, demonstrate they're handling data responsibly.
No more cutting corners, hoping nobody notices if they mess up.
Right.
What does this accountability actually look like in practice?
It means clear, documented processes for handling data protection policies in place, and they need to be able to show they're following them.
Okay, so no more vague statements.
No more hiding. It's about action.
Putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to data protection. Are there any specific things in GDPR that help with this?
One of the key mechanisms is data protection by design and default.
Data protection by design and default.
It's about building privacy into the core of systems and processes right from the start. Not an afterthought, but a foundation.
So it's like baking privacy into the cake from the beginning, not just sprinkling a few privacy crumbs on top later. I like that. How do companies actually show they're doing this privacy by design thing?
One way is through data protection impact assessments, or DPIAs.
DPIAs.
Basically, risk assessments that help organizations identify and minimize privacy risks before they launch something new.
So they have to think about privacy from the get-go, figure out how to protect our data before they even start collecting it. That makes sense.
It's a proactive approach.
But what about when my data leaves a company?
That's important. Data doesn't always stay in one place. It can be shared, transferred, even sent to other countries. And GDPR has rules about what happens in those cases.
So my data rights don't just vanish if my data crosses borders.
Exactly. Organizations can't just ship your data off anywhere without making sure there's adequate protection. Your rights travel with your data.
Like a data passport, making sure my privacy is respected wherever my data ends up. What's in place to make sure that happens?
GDPR provides several tools: adequacy decisions, standard contractual clauses, binding corporate rules, all ways to keep data protection consistent even across borders. No matter where your data goes, your rights go with it.
Okay, that's good to know. So we've covered what happens when data is shared or transferred. Anything else about how GDPR protects different types of data?
Yes, one more crucial aspect: special categories of personal data.
Special categories of.
GDPR recognizes that some types of data are super sensitive and need even stronger safeguards. Things like health info, genetic data, biometric data, anything revealing racial or ethnic origin.
That makes sense. Information like that can be really harmful in the wrong hands, like an extra layer of security for the most sensitive stuff. What are the rules around using this kind of data?
Organizations need a really solid reason to process these special categories. They need explicit consent from you or another strong legal basis. It's about understanding the potential impact this data could have if it was mishandled.
So not impossible, but the bar is high. All about minimizing risks and protecting people.
Exactly.
But we live in a world where, algorithms and AI are making more and more decisions about us. How does GDPR deal with that?
That's a great question, and you're right. This is where it gets really interesting. We're increasingly relying on algorithms to make decisions that affect us, from loans to job applications. And GDPR aims to protect people from unfair or biased outcomes that could come from these automated decisions.
This is getting a bit sci-fi, algorithms making decisions about our lives. But GDPR is trying to keep things fair. Do we have any say in what these algorithms are doing?
Absolutely. GDPR emphasizes transparency and fairness in automated decision-making. You even have the right, in some cases, to an explanation of the logic behind a decision and the right to contest that decision if you think it's wrong. It's about making sure humans are still in control.
That's reassuring. Don't want to become slaves to the algorithm.
Right.
So we've talked about individual rights, company responsibilities. What about enforcement? How do we make sure companies actually follow these rules?
That's where the teeth of the GDPR come in. The regulation gives power to supervisory authorities in each country to investigate complaints and issue fines for violations. These fines can be big, a clear message that data protection is serious business. In the UK, for example, you have the Information Commissioner's Office, or ICO. They're responsible for enforcing GDPR.
So it's not just a bunch of guidelines. There are real consequences if companies don't play by the rules. I bet those fines get their attention. Does the ICO handle every single complaint, though? Seems like a lot.
They have to prioritize the most serious cases. But they also provide guidance and raise awareness about data protection rights. It's not just about punishment, it's about encouraging compliance.
So it's about education and prevention, too. I like that. We've covered a lot of ground today. It's clear GDPR is complex, but it's a really important step forward in protecting our digital rights.
I completely agree. It's about shifting the power, giving individuals more control over their data, and encouraging a more responsible and transparent approach to data handling in this digital age.
Taking back control of our digital lives. I have one last question for you before we wrap up.
Go ahead.
GDPR focuses on personal data. But in a world where data is constantly being created and analyzed, where do we even draw the line between what's personal and what's not? It feels like that line is getting blurrier all the time.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something a lot of experts are thinking about right now.
I bet.
As technology changes, the definition of personal data might have to change too.
Hmm.
We need to be thinking about new types of data, new ways to identify someone,
Okay.
even if it's not the usual name and address.
Like the more data we make, the harder it gets to protect.
Right.
Because we don't even know what needs protecting anymore.
Yeah, it can be a bit overwhelming.
A little bit.
That's why it's an ongoing conversation.
Right.
We have to keep talking about these challenges, figuring out how to apply those GDPR principles as the data landscape keeps shifting.
It sounds like GDPR is like more than just rules. It's a whole framework for navigating this whole data world we live in.
It is. And remember, this deep dive, it's just the start of understanding GDPR.
Yeah.
It's about sparking that curiosity, giving you the tools to take control.
I definitely feel more informed, that's for sure.
Mm.
But it's one thing to know my rights.
Mm-hmm.
Actually using them is another.
Yeah.
What advice would you give someone who's like serious about their data privacy?
It's all about taking action.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Hmm.
Use your rights, hold those organizations accountable.
Right.
If you think your data is being mishandled, report it to
That's
your
true.
local data protection authority.
Got it.
They're there to help.
So we all have a part to play
Absolutely.
in making sure data is used responsibly and ethically.
It's not just on the companies
Yeah,
or the regulators.
it's on us.
It's a shared responsibility.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into GDPR. We hope you learned something new and feel ready to take charge of your data.
Absolutely. Until next time, stay curious and stay empowered.